Frank Sinatra was never a man who hid his opinions. Long before he became one of the most recognizable voices in music, he had already built a reputation for being direct, sharp, and sometimes brutally honest. From his rise as a singer to his transition into acting, with standout performances in From Here to Eternity and The Man with the Golden Arm, Frank Sinatra proved he was more than just a crooner. He was a force. And with that confidence came strong opinions about the people he worked with. Sinatra valued professionalism above everything else. He believed that if you stepped onto a set, you showed up prepared, respected the crew, and delivered your performance without unnecessary drama. But Hollywood, especially during its golden age, was full of personalities that clashed, egos that collided, and methods that didn't always align. And for Sinatra, there were certain actors he simply couldn't stand. These weren't random dislikes. They came from real experiences, moments on set, creative differences, and sometimes just pure personality clashes. And while Sinatra rarely went out of his way to publicly attack others, his frustrations were known within the industry. One of the most talked-about tensions involved Marlon Brando during the filming of Guys and Dolls. On paper, it was a perfect pairing, two icons sharing the screen. But behind the scenes, things were far from smooth. Sinatra came from a background of discipline and efficiency. He preferred to get things done quickly and move on. Brando, on the other hand, was deeply immersed in method acting. He would experiment, delay takes, and constantly adjust his performance. For Sinatra, this was frustrating. He reportedly grew irritated with Brando's approach, feeling that it slowed down production and complicated scenes that didn't need overthinking. There was also a subtle competitive tension between them, two dominant personalities trying to control the same space. While they remained professional on screen, the friction behind the scenes was undeniable. Sinatra once implied that Brando's style felt unnecessarily complicated, while Brando reportedly found Sinatra too rigid. It was a classic clash of two completely different acting philosophies. That tension didn't just stay on the surface. It affected the rhythm of their performances. Sinatra was known for his ability to deliver emotional authenticity in a single take, relying on instinct and timing, much like he did with music. Brando, however, would often explore multiple emotional variations, repeating scenes until he felt he had uncovered something deeper. This difference meant that Sinatra sometimes had to wait through multiple retakes, something he had little patience for. He believed that over-rehearsing could drain a scene of its natural energy, while Brando believed the opposite, that truth was discovered through repetition. The contrast created a subtle imbalance, where each actor felt the other was disrupting the flow. Even in musical sequences, where Sinatra was completely in his element, he felt Brando lacked the same ease and rhythm, which added another layer of frustration. In many ways, their conflict wasn't personal, it was philosophical. But in a high-pressure environment like a film set, those philosophical differences can feel very personal very quickly. Another name often linked to Sinatra's frustrations is Tony Curtis. Curtis was charismatic, confident, and very aware of his image. But that confidence sometimes came across as arrogance, especially to someone like Sinatra, who valued authenticity. While they didn't have a single explosive conflict, there was a noticeable lack of mutual respect. Sinatra reportedly saw Curtis as someone who focused too much on appearance rather than substance. For a man who had fought his way into Hollywood through sheer talent and persistence, Sinatra had little patience for what he perceived as superficiality. Curtis, in turn, wasn't particularly concerned with Sinatra's approval, which only widened the gap between them. It was less of a dramatic feud and more of a quiet but persistent disconnect. What made this tension more interesting was how differently both men approached fame itself. Sinatra had experienced rejection, career slumps, and a long climb back to relevance, which shaped his belief that talent had to be owned and constantly proven. Curtis, on the other hand, rose quickly and became a symbol of effortless stardom. To Sinatra, that kind of rise could seem undeserved or at least incomplete. He respected struggle because he had lived through it. So when he looked at Curtis, he sometimes saw someone who hadn't been tested in the same way. This created a silent judgment that lingered beneath the surface. Additionally, Curtis had a more playful, almost carefree attitude on set, while Sinatra treated work with a serious, almost disciplined mindset. That difference in tone made collaboration feel uneven, as if they were operating on completely different wavelengths. Over time, that gap didn't close, it simply became part of how they viewed each other. Then there was Mickey Rooney, a star from an earlier era whose personality could be overwhelming. Rooney was energetic, loud, and constantly performing, even off-camera. For Sinatra, who preferred a more controlled environment, this could be exhausting. While Rooney's enthusiasm was part of his charm, it didn't always translate well in professional settings. Sinatra reportedly found his behavior distracting, especially in situations that required focus and discipline. It wasn't personal hatred, but rather a clash of energy levels. Sinatra valued restraint. Rooney thrived on constant motion. And sometimes, those differences were enough to create tension. Rooney's style came from a completely different generation of Hollywood, one that thrived on speed, spontaneity, and an almost theatrical level of expression. He was used to entertaining constantly, even when the cameras weren't rolling. Sinatra, however, saw acting as something that required internal control. He believed that the power of a performance came from what was held back, not what was constantly displayed. So when Rooney filled the space with energy, Sinatra felt it disrupted the balance of the set. There were moments where Sinatra reportedly withdrew slightly, choosing to conserve his focus rather than engage with Rooney's non-stop enthusiasm. It created an invisible divide, one actor expanding outward, the other pulling inward. Neither approach was wrong, but together, they didn't quite align. A more complex dynamic existed with Orson Welles. Welles was known for his brilliance, but also for his larger-than-life personality. He carried himself with a certain intellectual authority that could come across as dismissive. Sinatra, who was confident in his own abilities, didn't respond well to that kind of attitude. There was an unspoken rivalry between them, two powerful figures who approached their craft in very different ways. Welles leaned toward artistic control and experimentation, while Sinatra focused on clarity, precision, and audience connection. Their interactions were marked by mutual awareness rather than mutual admiration. It wasn't a loud conflict, but it was a noticeable tension that reflected two very different philosophies of performance. Welles often spoke about cinema as an art form that required bold vision and control, while Sinatra approached it more like a performance that needed to resonate instantly with an audience. This difference created a subtle but persistent divide. Sinatra didn't always trust overly intellectual approaches, feeling they could distance the audience emotionally.